Multiple cut-up bodies, unbearable physical and psychological torture, and execution methods were so nauseating, it made the viewers faint. This is China's most horrendous execution methods. The ancient Chinese penal code is often referred to as the five punishment system, reflecting the fact that China traditionally used only five main types of punishment, assigned based on the severity of the crime. While it's unclear who first conceived this system, Chinese legends attribute its origin to a famed warrior named Qiu. Though his specific ethnic group remains uncertain, many associate him with the Hmong people or their allies, such as the Samiao or the Nine Li. In Chinese mythology, Qiu is considered a mythical king, and the association of these five punishments with him led to their adoption by the Xia dynasty. Before the Qin dynasty unified China, the punishments largely involved branding. For minor offenses like petty theft or pickpocketing, criminals were tattooed as a lasting mark of shame. More serious crimes such as robbery and looting typically resulted in amputations, with cutting off the nose being the most common form. The third and fourth levels of punishment also involved physical mutilation. Offenders could lose one or both feet, or, for especially severe crimes, be subjected to castration. The fifth and final punishment was execution, reserved for the gravest offenses. Women had a separate set of five punishments. The reason for this gender distinction is not entirely clear, but it may stem from the patriarchal nature of ancient Chinese society, where women were often not held equally accountable for crimes and were believed to have lower tolerance for physical punishment. Female punishments included forced labor such as grinding grain, having fingers squeezed between sticks, beatings with wooden rods, being compelled to take their own lives, or, in the most extreme cases, solitary confinement and isolation. The first imperial legal codes of a unified Chinese state emerged when Shi Huangdi established autocratic rule as the first emperor of the Qin dynasty in 221 BCE. The Qin regime was guided by the philosophy of legalism, which viewed human nature as inherently evil. Legalist thought held that in order to create a stable and orderly society, where even the weakest individuals could be protected, laws needed to be straightforward, harsh, and strictly enforced. The founder of legalism promoted authoritarian control, arguing that the ruler should hold absolute power and wield it with the force and suddenness of thunder or lightning. This philosophy endorsed the use of torture, forced labor, and executions as standard forms of punishment, encouraging judges to apply these penalties without hesitation. Unsurprisingly, such oppressive rule led to public unrest, and the Qin dynasty was overthrown by the Han in 206 BCE. With the rise of the Han dynasty, Confucianism was introduced into the reformed legal and constitutional framework of China. However, legalist principles were not entirely discarded. Traces of its harsh and punitive approach remained embedded in the system, ensuring that the justice system continued to be severe and unforgiving. Following the implementation of the legalist penal code under the Qin dynasty and the subsequent incorporation of Confucian principles during the Han dynasty, the traditional five-punishment system underwent significant changes. During the imperial era, the revised five punishments included bamboo lashes to the buttocks for minor offenses, beatings with a heavier stick applied to the back, buttocks, or legs for repeated petty crimes, penal labor or imprisonment for 1 to 3 years for standard criminal offenses, exile to remote regions, such as the southern island of Hainan, for more serious crimes, execution, which could be carried out by strangulation, decapitation, or the more gruesome method of slow slicing, depending on the severity of the crime. Each category of punishment was further divided into degrees, reflecting the seriousness of the offense. For instance, someone sentenced to a light beating could receive anywhere from 10 to 50 lashes, depending on the assigned degree. Imprisonment terms similarly ranged from 1 to 3 years. Even exile varied in intensity the graver the crime, the more distant and inhospitable the location. As for capital punishment, there were also degrees of severity. Strangulation was typically seen as less dishonorable than decapitation, even though it was a slower and more painful death. The most extreme form of execution, however, was the death by 1,000 cuts, prolonged and excruciating process. Lynching or death by 1,000 cuts could only be sentenced by the emperor's decree. This gruesome punishment followed a prescribed order, starting with the flaying of pieces of skin muscles and then removal of body parts to maximize pain, but keeping the vital organs functioning. Commonly, lynching consisted of 8 slices to the body, but it could go up to 120 slices. The torture would start with slicing the face, followed by hands, feet, chest, stomach, and the final blow was made at the heart, or by decapitating. Western writers who witnessed lynching in their lives described it as torture for the soul. It was meant to destroy the future of the offender's spirit, so it cannot be recognizable in the afterlife. In the ancient Chinese judiciary process, judges and magistrates were treated with absolute authority and respect. Witnesses and the accused would be in a prostrate position before an official through the entire proceeding. The dread of being tortured loomed over the head of the accused even in court. The ancient Chinese authority had full confidence in this cruel and unwarranted system of justice, even though they knew that from time to time a wrongly tortured accused may give in and confess a crime despite being innocent. However, they advocated that the torture method to justice is highly efficient because it saved time and money by solving cases rapidly, as the criminal cases could be solved solely by accused confession. Torture would be deployed from the get-go and became an integral part of the investigations. In ancient and imperial China, the outcome of any trial hinged primarily on one key piece of evidence, the confession of the accused. According to the Chinese Penal Code, a conviction could not be secured without a confession. If you think this presented an obvious loophole in their justice system, think again. While it was true that an individual could deny all charges indefinitely and avoid punishment despite mounting evidence, this also meant that authorities could employ any means necessary to force a confession, since the case depended heavily on it. During hearings, it was common practice to restrain the accused and witnesses by tying their arms around a pole. Guards would tighten the ropes, twisting their arms to discourage lying or dishonesty. The harsh treatment often made witnesses hesitant to come forward, but if summoned, they would be forcibly dragged into court, often kicking and screaming. Those unwilling to be part of the proceedings faced further restraint in a device called a cangia flat wooden frame that was locked around a person's neck. This device could be supported by the shoulders or serve as the lid of a tiny wooden cage so small that the prisoner's feet could not touch the ground. Such treatment exerted extreme pressure on the neck and could even cause strangulation. Often, the cangi was small enough to prevent the prisoner from reaching their own mouth, making eating and drinking difficult and requiring assistance. The accused had to wear the cangi continuously until the trial's verdict, and if found guilty, they might remain restrained for longer. Even if not imprisoned, authorities would force them to wear the cangi in public as a humiliating symbol. One less sadistic but still brutal method of execution was the use of the neck tower. The prisoner was placed inside a cage made of the kangi and stood on a small stone platform. Each day, 1 or 2 stones would be removed, gradually increasing the strain on the prisoner's neck until they succumbed to strangulation. In the imperial administration, receiving a letter marked with a piece of red silk was a sign of disgrace for an official, signaling that they must either hang themselves or poison themselves immediately. Another cruel method involved pulling veins from the back of the prisoner's shins until they bled to death. Not all Chinese capital punishments focused solely on physical torture. The method known as the slow drip inflicted relentless psychological torment that could drive prisoners to beg for a swift death. This form of torture involved continuously dropping water onto the forehead of the restrained prisoner, who was kept immobile with no means of escape. Sometimes, acid was also used instead of water, causing excruciating burns that penetrated the skin and reached the brain. The terror intensified because the prisoner could never predict whether the next drop would be harmless water or painful acid. Reports from various media sources indicate that, even in modern China, similar methods of psychological and physical abuse are still employed. In 2021, media outlets revealed that Chinese citizens are often secretly abducted, detained, and subjected to torture. Beyond these allegations, prisoners in China today may face physical and sexual abuse, forced labor, and forced sterilizations. The United Nations has been attempting to engage the Chinese government to address these serious human rights violations.